at 11 a.m. this morning. Don't meet us there, beat us there. Joining us now, the president of MediaMatters.org, Angelo Carusone. Angelo, good morning, man. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. Always a pleasure to have you. Yes, we're going to be at the NFL. I want to talk to you about the NFL in a minute or two because you are so knowledgeable about Fox, and I'm going to talk to you about how they play into that. But before we do that, we've got some other ground that you and I definitely need to cover. And I want to start with Sean Hannity. Now, there are a couple of pieces that you all have up right now, both by Matt Gertz. One, Sean Hannity spent the last year laying the groundwork for an authoritarian response to the Russia probe. That's one thing Matt has written. And also introducing the Sean Hannity Expanding Universe, Fox Anti-Mueller Alternative Reality. Matt says he's reviewed all 487 of Sean Hannity's segments about the first year of Robert Mueller's investigation, and here's what he found. So let's do a little deep dive on that, if you don't mind, Angelo.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So I think that the bottom line takeaway is that the response to the Mueller probe from both the Trump administration, it's best understood through Sean Hannity's program, and that the nature of the response is actually fundamentally designed to basically justify what would otherwise be an either authoritarian or, at minimum, a response that is not entirely consistent with the Constitution. And what it really boils down to is that when you look at all the segments and you actually digest it all at once, what the synthesis, what the arc is, the big takeaways are the following: that there are deep dark forces out there that are conspiring in order to get rid of Trump. That in turn justifies a range of responses that basically any and all responses that you can imagine, up to and including not just firing the second special counsel and other, but purges of the intelligence and Justice Department communities, and that the third aspect of that is that the real criminals are not Trump, but rather Hillary Clinton. And maybe, like James Comey and some other people in law enforcement they've explicitly called out. And that really what should happen is a targeted enforcement against Hillary Clinton. And that's the big takeaway. Now, when you look at the people that are involved, it's really the same. And that was the other thing when you sort of see these trend lines emerging as well, which is that when you look at all of the segments in total, there's just a consistent cast of characters that are appearing on the program. So Greg Jarrett, who's Fox News' legal analyst, who's pretty far out there, appears on one out of every four segments and basically is pushing a really extreme radical theory. Now, if you rewind this to 3 years ago, it would have been Judge Napolitano. But he has said too many things about the Constitution and about Trump's actions that he's not dependable enough for them, right? So it was obvious that they swapped him out in terms of characters because he wouldn't play that part. And then it was a combination of Trump's own legal team, who was on 50 of the segments, Trump's or former Trump sort of communications people that were in the space, so that basically bounced it out to another quarter, or this person by the name of Sarah Carter who kind of masquerades as a journalist, but what she really does is get leaks from some friendly justice officials or members of the intelligence community like David Nunes' office, and kind of repackages that as breaking news and investigative journalism, but it's mostly just strategic leaks designed to reinforce whatever counter-narrative Hannity is pushing. So at its core, those are the big takeaways.
Yeah. Matt writes, and I wonder, is this or is this not an exaggeration, Angelo? And folks, quick calls, 866-99-SIRIUS. Sean Hannity is Trump's unofficial chief of staff. Is that an exaggeration or is that real?
I think it's a fair statement to make, and the in part because of it. If you think about the role as a chief of staff as somebody that is the closest to the president consistently, that has the biggest and most impact on the shape and texture of not just the immediate staffing around the White House, but also the way in which the administration is responding to major moments or driving their own agenda. That is it. That is Hannity. He really is, or maybe to put it into more simply, the last person in the room with the president is usually the chief of staff before a major decision is made. And that's Hannity. That's not John Kelly these days. I mean, they speak every night after the program before they go to bed. The synergy between what is happening in the White House and staffing and strategic decisions around responses to some of these major things is increasingly lining up with Hannity's program. Some of it is Trump following his lead, a very, very small portion. A lot of it is Hannity realigning his program to kind of support the broader narrative and pushback that they've kind of conjured up. It's a scary thing to think about, but there's too much overlap at this point and alignment for it to be merely about communications. I think is sort of what Matt was trying to capture there, and I definitely understand why.
Matt's numbers, I just have to highlight these folks. And if we're streaming on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, you can see the article yourself on your screen right now and look at the document or the numbers I'm looking at. 256 segments, 53% included criticism of the media's coverage of the Mueller investigation, which Hannity and his guests consider excessively anti-Trump. 191 segments included commentators suggesting that there had been no collusion between Trump and his associates in Russia. And just one other category, 82 segments feature attempts to construct a counter-narrative by claiming that the real collusion had been between Russia and Democrats. This is often a reference, as you mentioned, about the Democrats, a reference to the Uranium One pseudo-scandal, which was referenced in 38%, almost 40% of all segments about the Mueller investigation. This is anti-special counsel headquarters. That wasn't, you used another terminology a minute ago. I don't remember what it was that was apt. But this is really ground zero to attack the whole investigation right here on Hannity's show.
Yeah, actually there's a term for what a lot of it is called.
Okay.
You know, like for example, the Uranium One references, the fact that they're in almost half of the segments. The name of the fallacy is called whataboutism, and it's actually a deflection tactic. It is a logical fallacy, even if everything that Hannity's segments say are true. Let's even give him that. Let's even say everything about these counter narratives is accurate. It still doesn't actually mean that the core part of the subject matter that is incorrect. That in any way that the investigation to Trump's administration and Trump's campaign is invalid. That there was potentially wrongdoing there, right? It doesn't do anything about that. It's actually ironically, and I think this is mostly a function of coincidence, whataboutism is actually a propaganda tactic that has been widely relied on by Putin's current sort of like propaganda communications operations. It is a really big part of how they engage in some of their public PR is by deploying whataboutism. It's a really effective strategy of simultaneously keeping your people engaged and supportive, and it actually almost automatically trains your supporters to go out there and evangelize on your behalf because it's such an easy thing to do. And I imagine many of the listeners have experienced in their own personal life where, you know, no matter what they mention about the investigation, somebody will immediately shoot back at them about Uranium One. And then the conversation sort of gets derailed because now you're having a separate side discussion about something totally disconnected and unrelated from the core part of what they were saying. And, you know, the people they were arguing with didn't need much training for that. Just a few times of hearing it, you're able to kind of replicate and advance the whataboutism tactic. And it's partly why it's so effective because it has kind of a virality component to it.
Wow. You mentioned Putin's tactics in Russia. Angelo Carusone with us, folks. Quarter past the hour. 866-99 Sirius. Is Sean Are Sean in the White House studying up on what Putin does? Is Putin advising them in this strategy? Is it that close, you think, or?
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
it's more a function of the fact that it was popularized, and it kind of just, it functions by immersion. I also think that it's I think it's a hallmark of what people in in sort of precarious, authoritarian-ish, deceitful situations do when you have power. Is this tactic? So I think it's more a function of the fact that in some ways the corruption, the lack of regard for certain institutions, and finally and lastly, I think the other ingredient is an ends justify the means mentality. Mm-hmm. When you have all three of those things sort of together, like you do in Putin, and like you do certainly now with Trump and the orbit sort of around him, it is just a common tactic that people in those circumstances, I think, would deploy. It's just extremely well used and popularized by Putin.
So where are we then, Angelo, on combating Hannity? Where are we on advertisers? Are we any closer to moving him out?
The the interesting thing about Hannity is that in terms of financial losses, the only other comparison that we have at Fox is the Gun Beck campaign that so many organizations were involved in, and in that case, it took about a year to reach the financial threshold where his advertiser rates started to plummet, meaning that he was losing about half of his maybe a half to a third of the value of his commercial breaks. That Fox News started to reduce the commercials during his program. We're at that point already with Hannity and have been now for more than 6 months. So Hannity actually reached the place that it took a year to get Glenn Beck to within about 3.5 months. So his advertiser rates have declined and plummeted significantly. So when you look pound for pound at the same advertiser across Fox News, he is getting significantly less revenue for it. The other thing is that he's done is that he has made Fox's advertisers extremely skittish and scared. So in the wake of the Laura Ingraham situation, she used to have 38 paid commercials a show. She only has 15 these days. Mm-hmm. They cut her ad inventory in half, and the reason I connect that to Hannity is because it's as much about Hannity's program as it was about what Laura Ingraham said, because it kind of made the advertisers anxious about Fox's nighttime programming. So the difference now is that Fox has really convinced itself that this is their future. A while back I was on the show and we were talking about which direction Fox could go in, and I said it could go in either direction in the long run. It could be, in the future, it could be unrecognizable in that it is a beacon of actually decent reporting because they put some investing in there and they realized that that's where they have to go in order to stay profitable and viable, or it would become so radical that it wouldn't even look at what it like today, that they're going to have to make a decision at some point in which direction they're going. I think they've made that decision. James Murdoch is being pushed out. Rupert Murdoch is not going to relinquish really any control, or especially with respect to the vision and long-term trajectory of the network. They're trying to spin off the entertainment side of Fox, which is the one thing that was counterbalancing them. I mean, part of the reason Fox News is actually constrained is because they can't alienate their entertainment side, their entertainment division. And now they're trying to spin that off. So basically they're getting rid of the only two stops, the only two checks on Fox News' extremism, which is their current CEO, James Murdoch, and the other parts of the company that would be destroyed if Fox News went full fascist. And I think we've seen the indications that they've made their decision. And so what that basically means for Hannity is they're willing to absorb a significant amounts of financial losses every single day. Because they think that he serves a greater purpose. In this case, it's a political agenda. It doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to do the work, because we absolutely should. But that's it. I mean, the lay of the land is they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising revenue. That's not chump change. They are absorbing it. And I feel like at least everybody should know that, because it really does put their interest into focus. I mean, think about it. It's the equivalent of giving a political donation. because the reason they're willing to accept that loss is because they're trying to achieve a broader political purpose. It's not because of some business consideration. You don't lose that much money for business reasons. They're doing it for political reasons.
For political reasons.
That's become clear.
But as we talked about before, some of that money, a little bit of it is offset because of the exorbitant basic cable fee we all pay them that we're not aware of, and the other Fox properties probably help subsidize the news channel, don't they?
That's correct. The biggest asset that they have, the other Fox properties help pad the losses. And because it's just a bigger bottom line. So if another division is overperforming a little bit, when Murdoch himself has to report that back to shareholders, the losses with Fox News, at least with respect to advertising, don't seem as significant for the company proportionally as they could be.
Okay.
And then separately, they have a buffer. Their buffer is their subscriber fees, and I think long term, that will ultimately be their undoing because the future of TV is going to be in decoupling. I mean, one of the things is you don't have a choice that Fox News is part of your basic package. You don't have that option. You have to pay the fee because your cable company always puts it in your basic option, even if you never want to turn it on. And at some point, being able to pick and choose which channels are part of your package means that you'll get to decide not to give Fox News $1. So, I mean, once consumers actually say, wait a minute, I want to save, $30, $40 a month because I'm never going to watch these channels, I think that's the only way you'll see that part of Fox News' revenue stream decline.
You also explained us before the relationship between the Fox News channel and their sports properties and how they use the sports networks as leverage on behalf of the news channel. So what I want to do now, as we look at this NFL situation, I'm curious, Angelo Carusone, president of Media Matters, folks, 24 minutes past the hour. The NFL owners, and Robert Kraft said it at the so-called secret meeting, and there's other scuttlebutt about this, fear Trump. They came up with this ridiculous new policy, putting the onus on the players, because they fear that Trump could hurt them by having his base no longer tune in to the NFL. The problem with that theory, and it may be credible, that's why I want to ask you about it. How would it be in Fox parent company's interest to harm NFL viewership vis-a-vis Fox News Channel promoting Trump's base to be anti-NFL? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to hand it over to you and I know I'm just springing this on you. I just don't see how, unless they're doing something there too that's not in their best interest, whether it's worth that to get this other agenda out and wrap him up in the flag and the anthem and all of that, whether it's worth hurting NFL viewership, even if Trump wants to hurt the NFL and get back at the NFL for not letting him be a part of the club, Angelo. I mean, we're talking about Fox's overall money. That's the big money. They show the NFL. And if they're not making any money off the news channel, that has to thrive. So can you help me kind of figure that out or reconcile that?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think it's a multidimensional in some ways. I think a part of the calculus on on Fox's part, with respect to the limited issue of viewership, is that I actually think that they believed that they could get the best of both worlds. In that Trump, that lining up with the attacks on the NFL around the anthem was actually the kind of culture war fight that they like to have.
Right.
And they haven't had a good one of those since the war on Christmas, so they needed something like it, I mean, then it's just like they needed it, and they wrote it the same way that they wrote the war on Christmas stuff. And so it just kind of fit, so that they needed it. I also think that, and this is the part where, they were lining up with Trump, they got all the benefits there. So I think there was a piece of it that was great for Fox. I think part of the reason why they were fine with their own people sort of going at them was that I don't think that they were convinced that the efforts on the part of Trump to get people to tune it out, or even on some of their own supporters, was fully going to matter. That in a way, I don't think they actually thought that he had the power to affect commercial interests, and that historically we've seen that play out. Trump has called for a lot of boycotts of things, and has pushed on them a lot. He's called for boycotts of Macy's. He's called for boycotts of Apple.
Right,
I mean, you can go right down the chain. He's called for boycotts of Oreo cookies. There are a lot of things that he has tried to apply consumer pressure to, and has never been able to successfully have any meaningful any meaningful change in the way consumers interact with the companies that he's targeting. Now, as president, he can have an effect on stock. And so that's a slightly different situation because of some regulatory controls and powers that he has. But from purely a consumer pressure organizing, they have things to look at to say, well, wait a minute, does he have a demonstrated track record of being able to move the needle here? The answer is no. And I think that they had sort of made the calculus that even though they might have been, on the one hand, celebrating victory in the ratings going down last year on their Fox News channels, I actually think that they really did make a calculus that part of the big reason why ratings were down were not so much a function of the anthem protests, but rather a function of the fact that there were some pretty big people that were injured and maybe the games weren't really terrific, that there were other factors that were kind of depressing and suppressing engagement. A lot of the concussion stuff, I just think that they believed that there were other factors doing it, so they weren't really contributing to a problem that wasn't going to exist anyway. And then lastly, I do think that to some extent Fox has a history of actually going against their own interests, and so I just don't think that it's always their top of their considerations. We've seen this play out a few times where, Hannity has attacked advertisers, Ingram has attacked advertisers, their own advertisers that are advertising on other shows. I mean, we saw that flare up in the Keurig incident most clearly and vividly. So, at some point, too, Fox doesn't do a very good job of protecting even their own intersecting commercial interests, and so even if they're, what I'm getting to there is that I think that calculus at the top is sort of the approach they were taking, and then I think lastly, I just don't think it was a huge thing for them because they are willing to make certain sacrifices for just the culture for Fox News' culture there, and I think that's inertia that was held over from when Roger Ailes was running the place. That there has always been this idea that you really can't touch what's going on at Fox, and if they want to go against the interests of the company, so be it. That's sort of the way it is.
That's insane.
Yeah, I know.
We have to find out, and we won't resolve this here, but just going forward, and we'll be at NFL headquarters today at 11 o'clock, folks, demonstrating around this anthem. But I don't know that it's soon to expire, but I wonder when their contract to broadcast the NFL comes up, because even as you mentioned earlier about decoupling, I mean, if I put on the hat of an NFL, a scared, ridiculous NFL owner, racist even, and I'm saying, well, I got to do this because of the Fox audience, but then I look at it and say practically, well, wait a minute, another Fox property is ginning up the Fox audience against the NFL.
Yep.
Then I'm going to do decoupling if I'm an NFL owner. I'm saying, y'all, let's everybody's going to cable and Netflix anyway. You think people wouldn't watch the NFL on Netflix? You really think people wouldn't do that? Come on now.
No, I know. It's a 5-year contract.
It's a 5-year contract.
Yeah, so it'll expire in 2023.
Yeah, shoot, man.
I know.
That's crazy.
Well, the crazy thing about it is they re-signed it just a few months ago, knowing everything that they knew about the depression and the decline of the rates, which is the other factor, by the way. Sometimes they are willing to. Murdoch has a really significant cash pile that he keeps in strategic reserve, and he is really intentional about that too. And one of the things that I think he has always demonstrated a willingness to do is to use his papers to attack targets that they are about to try to acquire or compete with. And if I was doing negotiations And I had, to me, the decline of ratings and even the volatility there, the specter that something could go down, could go down in the future. I would, and I know they would put on the table as a negotiating tactic. So maybe that $3 billion deal that they signed could have been a $3.5 billion deal or something if the idea that Fox's, that the NFL's games weren't as controversial, which even though Fox was the one that helped make it a controversial thing. And I don't put that part past them too, which is that, in the short term they might be taking a hit, but if they're making a long-term investment in a property and they can decline the cost or give themselves some leverage when they go into the negotiating room, that they're willing to take that hit because in the long run they're getting something that would have been really, really expensive for just a little bit less expensive. And that's where I think, some of these sort of internal business decisions there start to become a little messier.
Angelo Carusone, President of Media Matters. Never enough time for Angelo and me. Angelo, appreciate you as always, man, and I'll see you at the barricades, okay?
You bet. Thank you, and good luck today.
All right, thank you. Happy Memorial Day weekend to you as well, Angelo Carusone. Folks, we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. We got a couple of guests. We got a full house today, so stay tuned right here. Don't go away. Sirius XM Progress 127, Resistance Radio. Get woke, get ready for impeachment. This is MIP.